Scary telling.
I couldn't believe my luck when I saw him walk into the bar. He had crystal blue eyes, light brown hair, and vanilla skin, all the traits I was looking for. I knew right then and there that he was the one. We hit it off immediately. His name was Jake, and he was charming and funny, with a hint of danger that made my heart race. I could tell he was interested in me, too. As we talked and laughed over dinner, I couldn't help but think about what would come next. I knew I wanted him, but I had to be careful. I didn't want to scare him off. After dinner, I invited him back to my place. He eagerly accepted, and I led him to my bedroom, my heart pounding with anticipation. Once we were alone, I could feel the tension between us. He leaned in to kiss me, and I knew it was time to make my move. I led him over to the bed, and as he lay down, I straddled him, looking into his eyes. "Do you trust me?" I asked, hoping he would say yes. He nodded, and I smiled. "Good," I said, "because I have a surprise for you." I led him over to the closet and swung open the door, revealing row after row of men's corpses hanging from hooks. Jake recoiled in horror, his eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. I laughed, enjoying the look on his face. "This," I said, gesturing to the corpses, "is my collection. And you, my dear, are just the type I've been looking for." Jake tried to run, but I was too fast. I tackled him to the ground and tied him up, relishing the feeling of power it gave me. He struggled and screamed, but it was no use. He was mine now. As I sat there, looking down at him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I had found my next victim, and he was going to be a good one. I leaned in and whispered in his ear. "Don't worry," I said. "It won't hurt too much." As I tied Jake up, he struggled and begged me to let him go. He didn't understand that he was mine now, that he was just another trophy in my collection. I could see the fear in his eyes as I began to toy with him, enjoying the feeling of power it gave me. I wanted to break him, to make him beg for mercy, but I had to be careful. I didn't want to kill him too quickly. As I sat there, watching him squirm, I began to wonder if I had gone too far this time. I had never brought a victim back to my place before, never shown them my collection. But there was something about Jake that made me want to break my own rules. I could tell he was starting to lose hope, that he was resigning himself to his fate. I decided to give him a small glimmer of hope to make his suffering all the more intense. "You know," I said, leaning in close to his ear, "if you can escape, you'll be the first one to ever do so." Jake looked at me with disbelief, but I could tell he was listening. "If you can get out of these ropes and make it out of the house alive, you'll be free. But if you fail, well..." I trailed off, letting him fill in the blanks. Jake began to struggle harder, trying to free himself from the ropes. I smiled, enjoying his desperation. But then something unexpected happened. I could feel a pang of guilt in my chest, a sense that what I was doing was wrong. I had never felt this before, and it scared me. I tried to push the feeling aside, to focus on the pleasure of the moment, but it was too late. The guilt had taken hold of me. I knew I couldn't let Jake go now, not after what I had done to him. But I also knew that I couldn't kill him, not yet. I needed to think of a new plan. As I sat there, watching Jake struggle, I knew that things were about to change. My obsession had taken a dark turn, and I wasn't sure where it would lead me next. But one thing was certain, Jake wasn't going anywhere. He was mine now, and I was going to enjoy every moment of his suffering. As I watched Jake struggle to free himself from the ropes, I knew I had to do something to break him. I wanted to see him beg for mercy, to see the fear in his eyes as I tortured him. I leaned in close to him, my breath hot on his ear. "You're not getting out of here alive," I whispered. "You're mine now, and I'm going to enjoy every moment of your suffering." I began to torture him, slowly and methodically. At first, it was just small things, a cut here, a bruise there, but as time went on, I grew bolder. I enjoyed the feeling of power it gave me, the way I could control his every movement. I wanted him to feel pain, to understand that he was at my mercy. But as the night wore on, I began to feel a strange sense of guilt. I had never felt this way before, and it scared me. I tried to push the feeling aside, to focus on the pleasure of the moment, but it was too late. The guilt had taken hold of me. I realized that what I was doing was wrong, that I was taking pleasure in someone else's pain. But I couldn't stop. It was like a drug, and I was addicted. As I continued to torture Jake, I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew that he was in for a long and painful night, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But then something unexpected happened. Jake began to talk to me, to try and reason with me. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "What do you get out of it?" I didn't know how to answer him. I didn't know why I was doing this, why I was so obsessed with men and fit a certain physical type. "It's just a game," I said, trying to deflect his questions. A way to pass the time. But Jake wasn't buying it. He knew there was something deeper going on, something dark and twisted. "You're sick," he said. "You need help." I tried to ignore him, to continue my torture, but his words had struck a nerve. I knew that he was right, that I needed to change my ways. But it was too late. As the night wore on, Jake's screams grew louder, his pain more intense. And all I could do was watch, helpless and alone. In the end, I did what I always did with my victims. I added him to the collection, a trophy of my deadly obsession. And as I stood there, looking at his lifeless body hanging from the hook, I knew that I would never be satisfied. There would always be another man, another victim, another conquest. For me, the hunt would never end. After Jake's death, I knew that I couldn't keep going on like this. I had crossed a line, and I needed to find a way to stop. But even as I tried to resist the urge to hunt, I couldn't help but feel drawn to it. It was like an addiction, something that I couldn't control. I spent days holed up in my apartment, trying to resist the urge to go out and find another victim. But it was no use. I knew that I needed to add to my collection, to find another man who fit my physical type. And so, I began to plan. I scouted out bars and clubs, looking for the perfect victim. I knew that I had to be careful, that I couldn't let anyone see me with the man before he disappeared. But as I plotted and schemed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. I knew that what I was doing was wrong, that I was taking pleasure in someone else's pain. And yet, I couldn't stop. It was like a part of me had been awakened, a part that was dark and twisted. And then, I found him. His name was David, and he was perfect. He had all the traits I was looking for: crystal blue eyes, light brown hair, and vanilla skin. I approached him at the bar, pretending to be interested in him. He took the bait, and soon we were back at my apartment. But as I led him to the bedroom, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. I knew what was coming, and I wasn't sure I could go through with it. But then, something unexpected happened. David started to talk to me, to open up about his life and his struggles. And for a moment, I forgot about my obsession. I forgot about the collection and the hunt. We talked for hours, and as the sun began to rise, I realized that I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill him. And so, I let him go. I told him to leave, to never come back. And as I watched him walk out the door, I knew that things were going to change. I knew that I couldn't keep going on like this, that I needed to find a way to control my obsession. It was going to be a long and difficult road, but I was ready to try. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. I knew that I could change, that I could overcome my addiction. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was a future for me beyond the hunt. In the days and weeks that followed David's visit, I knew that I had turned a corner. I was no longer obsessed with the hunt, no longer driven by the need to collect men who fit my physical type. But even as I tried to move on from my past, I couldn't help but feel haunted by it. The memories of my victims, the screams and the blood, continued to haunt me. I knew that I needed to make amends, to find a way to atone for my sins. And so, I began to research programs and therapy options for people like me, people who had been consumed by their addictions and obsessions. It was a difficult and painful process, but I knew that it was the right thing to do. I needed to find a way to make sure that no one else suffered at my hands. But even as I tried to make amends, the police began to close in. They had been investigating my activities for months, tracking my movements and collecting evidence. At first, I tried to deny everything, to claim that I had nothing to do with the disappearances of the men in my collection. But it was no use. The evidence was overwhelming, and I knew that I was going to be caught. And so, I turned myself in. I knew that I couldn't run from my past, that I needed to face the consequences of my actions. As I sat in the interrogation room, staring into the eyes of the detectives who were grilling me, I felt a sense of relief. It was finally over. I was going to pay for my crimes, but at least I could finally put them behind me. In the end, I was sentenced to life in prison. It was a harsh sentence, but I knew that I deserved it. I had taken the lives of innocent men, and I could never make up for that. But even as I sat in my cell, surrounded by the cold, gray walls, I knew that I had found a sense of peace. I was no longer consumed by my obsession, no longer driven by the need to collect men who fit my physical type. I knew that I had a long road ahead of me, that I would spend the rest of my life trying to make up for my sins. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like there was hope. And as I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, I knew that I was going to be okay. I was finally free from my obsession, and I could start to rebuild my life, one day at a time.